Good evening, I'm Mike Wallace, and we're here with another weekly installment of Footprints of Pacifica. This is a weekly show sponsored by the Pacifica Historical Society, and we are fortunate here tonight to have photographer Ed Grant, who has brought with us the Piers of the California coast, which made up several years of his life putting this together and talking other folks into helping him out with it. So Ed, give me a little bit of a start on where you began your career as a pier and surf photographer.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mike, for letting me say a few words about the book, which had its beginning roughly 5 years ago by now. It was a middle of the night thought I had about producing a photography book on the piers of the California coast. And I had no idea if that would be a possibility or where that thought would take me.
So was it actually a dream or a nightmare when you started to put this together?
It could have been both.
Could have gone either way.
It could have been both. But it turned out remarkably well. And in the morning, I did a Google search on piers of the California coast, and I discovered there was not a single book in the world dealing with that topic, and that was the green light to pursue the dream.
So when you started your photography career, how old were you when you got this inkling that you would like to pursue that as a career as opposed to a hobby?
Probably when I retired from teaching. I had a 38-year teaching career, and when I wrapped up that career, I visited Mavericks. This is 12 years ago. Became a Mavericks photographer, and over the 12 years, I had an opportunity to travel up and down the coast of California. And interestingly enough, in promoting the book and in visiting, audiences, I'd get asked from time to time how long I'd been taking pictures, where my photography started. And I'll be darned if my sister did not come up with a picture. We may have it in the studio of when I was 2 years old.
So you haven't changed much.
I haven't changed much, and there I am with a camera around my neck. And I guess even today, if you gave me a choice between a camera and a meal, I would probably take the camera.
Well, you're still nice and trim, so maybe you've been doing a lot of photography in the meantime.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when we got involved with this together and I helped edit this book with you, you had the ambitious plan of shooting a lot of the Southern California piers from the air. So you literally went in like a tactical arm and got some really unique angles down there. How did that kind of come to pass, and who did you talk into doing that with you?
On two occasions, I was able to charter helicopters, and the first charter was prompted when I was attempting to photograph the pier at Redondo Beach. It's a horseshoe pier, a circular pier, and I could not figure out a way to get an angle for capturing the pier. And I went through a lot of different options, and I finally decided if I want to capture this pier and I want to have a complete compilation for the book, I was going to have to charter a helicopter. And that's what I did. And I was able to capture the Redondo Beach pier. I was also able to capture the Malibu pier on that occasion, which turned out to be the
So that's actually the cover shot that you took, and that was also from the air, because that's a really wonderful shot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have taken shots of the Malibu pier over the years, from the surfer's point of view, shooting the pier, and there's a lot of history wound up in that. And I think that's one of the things that we tried to do with this book, was to get some of the essence of those regions through the kind of eyes of the piers and a little bit of the surf culture and California history. One question I have for you is, in the end, there's a whole slew of authors that helped you put this together. How are you so successful in roping people into these multi-year projects?
Oh, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about that, because I've been able to compile an extraordinary group of people who have contributed to the success of the book. And even in your situation, Mike, I'll never forget, having to deal with you and bring you on board. And one of the ideas I had was that you would be able to promote the Half Moon Bay surf team, which you are the coach of, and it would give you an opportunity to promote what was dear to you. And I think that helped bring you on board. And as an editor, it's pretty much a time-consuming, thankless job. And we have 15 other contributors who have written marvelous chapters.
Well, one of the things you've done every year is you've been a host of the Mavericks Everest of the Seas photo exhibit, which has also been lucky to be part of. And again, as you said, you successfully talked me into that as well, with a little incentive there to raise some funds for the Half Moon Bay Surf Club. And your friend Frank Chiarte has taken over that this year and did the same thing, which was really wonderful, since we're trying to expand the community surf base and instill some good values in our younger surfers in this region. So thank you for that. Who are some of the other authors that were involved? Is there a couple of them that stand out to you in your recollection?
I have 3 or 4 writers that are remarkable in who they are. I'll never forget a writer by the name of Iris King, who wrote on the pier at Gaviota. She is a lifeguard, and we met one morning, actually, at the entrance of Gaviota State Park. And she approached me. She had the uniform of a California Highway Patrol. She had a bulletproof vest. She had the uniform. She had a weapon. And she actually had started out as a lifeguard, but she became a peace officer for the state of California, which gives her additional responsibilities. And we were at the entrance to the park, and she said, well, get into the pickup and we'll drive down to the, for the pier. And I got into the pickup, and racked right behind me was a machine gun.
Yeah, so you got into a strange vehicle with a well-armed woman who offered to take you up the coast. That sounds a bit dubious to me, but then what happened?
And I sat pretty darn quietly.
Yeah, good manners.
The best, and I had my most submissive personality going.
So she had a really interesting spin on that particular pier, and what was that?
She had grown up in the Gaviota area, and she became a lifeguard at a very young age, and she became a park ranger when she was like 18 years old, and she stayed on the Gaviota pier. And when she was 21, she had the responsibility for monitoring all of the activity on the pier. So here you have like a 18 or 20-year-old girl.
So things have kind of come full circle, where back in the day, with prohibition and bootlegging and all this sort of stuff, we, amongst the many manifestations of these piers, starting out as, a tourist attraction, or maybe during prohibition, a way to bring booze on shore. Here you have all these years later, and then you had, somebody monitoring that area for drug smuggling is what
drug smuggling. Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and during that time, they had picked up a small boat that was laden.
Oh, while you were there? Or, she was riding
2
this.
weeks. Yeah, the same time span.
They're running pongas up from.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
So, were there any other authors that also stood out? Just one other anecdote before we head north?
There was an author by the name of Serge Dodino
Yeah.
who came on board just before he began his campaign to be mayor of Imperial Beach, which is a community in South San Diego,
Yeah.
within 10 miles of the border of Mexico.
So the Imperial Beach Pier, that's the furthest southerly pier, isn't it? Out of
Absolutely.
all the 37 piers that you cover in this book.
And so he began his campaign. And I thought, well, there'd be no way that he's going to have time to write for the book, but I'll be darned. He emailed me back and he said it would be a pleasure and an honor to write for the book. And so he contributed a beautiful chapter on Imperial Beach Pier. And in the meantime, he's doing his campaign. And so the election showed his opponent with like 100-vote lead. So I assume, okay, that Serge is going to go back to whatever he was doing. But I'll be darned, as they started counting the absentee ballots, he narrowed the gap until a week after the election was over, he was declared the winner. And I've never seen that in my life.
So in subsequent editions, are you going to have to rename him in there as the Mayor Dodino?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you created a mayor in the process of writing this book, or you didn't distract him from becoming one.
It was.
Well done. So as we move up the coast, there's such a variety of piers that we took a look at. As you mentioned, the one that was a horseshoe shape. One that also comes to mind as one of the premier research piers in the world, and that is the Scripps Pier. They do some remarkable things down there. My folks are down in that area, so I'm familiar with it. And having been a surf coach and coached my kids in the NSSAs, we've gone from pier to pier to pier where sand seems to gravitate. Is there anything about the Scripps Pier that comes to mind that made that a particularly interesting shoot for you?
Scripps Pier probably made the greatest impression of all of the piers on the California coast because of the research they've carried out since 1900.
Yeah, so the pier is almost the tip of a whole research institute that's backed up into La Jolla in that area.
University of San Diego.
Attached to the UCSD.
And their research on cancer and related areas is phenomenal.
Global warming and a lot of those issues, they're looking for solutions in the ocean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think foremost in the world.
Yeah.
So Scripps is, I think, an outstanding pier for what they've contributed to the health of the world.
And moving closer to home, there's a couple piers nearby. Was it Seacliff or
Seacliff Pier? We have a map. We might be able to show of the 37 piers on the California coast. And it's amazing, and I think one of the aspects that I'm very, very proud to share is the histories, the romantic appeal that people have been able to find and enjoy with the California piers. From the tip of Northern California, we have Crescent City Pier, and I think that a lot of the public would be delighted to become more familiar with the California coastal piers. There are 37. You can see that there are just a few in Northern California. Mother Nature is a very, very strong adversary and has taken its toll. It's very, very difficult to keep piers intact.
That's a really interesting point. I think most of the piers in this book, this is the third or fifth incarnation of that pier. They were originally, some are wharfs, some are piers. There's a whole variety in here that kind of reflect the local culture. And you mentioned Crescent City being the most northerly, and we have Imperial Beach as the furthest south. Crescent City has kind of an interesting history of being inundated by tsunamis. One of the hardest hit places on the California coast. What did you learn some interesting facts while you were up there shooting that pier?
We were photographing Crescent City. The day before we arrived, one of the pangas had washed ashore at the beach at Crescent City. And it was covered with barnacles, and when I went out to try to photograph it, they were very concerned that they had it in a secure area. They were not certain that it was free from radioactivity.
Oh, so that you think this had come over from Japan?
It had taken, I guess, 2 or 3 years to wash ashore. And I think it was the first debris that had washed ashore from Japan.
Oh, that you believe that was recorded?
Yeah, most of the debris would land in Oregon or Washington, but this was the first occasion.
Interesting. And speaking of shipwrecks, we were talking about Seabright or Seacliff Pier earlier in Santa Cruz area, and I think you mentioned that there is a strange feature at the end of that pier. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
somebody had the idea that it would be really a wonderful idea if they brought over a ship that had been used in World War I. It was called the Palo Alto. And they did in fact bring it over to Seacliff. They anchored it and tied it to the pier there, and they turned it into a ballroom. And so it was a a party or festival type of environment, and
was that around World War II or something like
World
that?
War II,
okay.
yeah, and it was it worked.
Creative use of surplus military gear. Okay.
Yeah, and it worked really well
Yeah.
until just about 6 years ago when Mother Nature whipped it apart, and it's closed now. But it did have a heyday.
So it's sunk right off the end.
It's still there.
People used to be able to go on board.
Sure.
And it somehow managed to not tear apart the pier in the process.
No, it's a habitat now for seagulls and birds and fish. But it's a wonderful little feature at the end of the pier.
And just north from there, there's a Capitola Pier, I believe, in the beautiful little community of Capitola with all the, that must have been an easy shot for you to take because of all the colorful sort of, they're not painted ladies, but all the shops and everything, a beautiful panoply of colors there.
Capitola has just the most beautiful neighborhood you could imagine, with the brightly colored cottages that are sitting just back from the pier. And it had its origin as a tourist attraction, and Capitola still has that reputation. It's a fishing pier. It's an active fishing pier.
It's hard to find parking there on the weekends.
Yes, it is, yeah.
So what angle did you take on that? Did you come from the south to try to capture some of the town and shoot the pier as well? There's, or you had a couple shots, I believe, of Capitola, didn't you?
Yeah, that would be the south.
Yeah, from the south.
So, and then the next pier north would be Santa Cruz Wharf.
Yeah.
And Mike, you wrote an exceptional article covering the history of Santa Cruz Wharf, which is
I spent some time there, which is interesting that you bring up with the kids surfing. A lot of competitions at Steamer Lane there, and kids learning to surf in Cowles Beach. The interesting thing was, until we started this book, I didn't actually know much about the wharf itself. And then we've had some competitions down there, and you can actually drive out. It's one of the few piers. There's a couple, I think Crystal Pier you can drive out on, and they actually have cottages there. The Santa Cruz Wharf you can. They have the big Woodies of the Wharf show once a year, which is, you had another feature in the book on that, which they bring out the old Woody padded station wagons, paneled station wagons. Beautiful spot. So what was your approach on shooting that pier?
Fortunately, Santa Cruz Pier is within, striking distance. I've probably visited Santa Cruz Pier a dozen times, you know, capturing what's going on. I featured in that chapter a program called the Odyssey program.
Ah, yeah.
And they have
Jack
made
O'Neill's.
available
Yeah.
to 75,000 local elementary school children. And what they do is they take the children out on a 65-foot catamaran called the Odyssey. And they introduce them to the marine life, to plankton, to all of the aspects of what's going on there.
Both my
It's
kids have
marvelous.
actually been on that trip. It gets booked early, and it's a really great educational trip.
It gives them a real appreciation for the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary and raises awareness for our coastline. Which
And I
is
think it's
wonderful.
Jack O'Neill's kids that run that, isn't that the case?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, you're an expert on wetsuits.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's another subject, but yeah, the whole story of the wetsuit, it kind of gets tied into the Piers as well, since one of the originators had done some research through the Scripps Institute at that time, and it was seen as a military garment, and they were trying to have insulation from underwater bomb explosions. And then other companies like Jack O'Neill's O'Neill wetsuits and Body Glove took it and ran with it and commercialized it. But the original inventor didn't get as much due at that time.
I bring this up because I wanted to credit Jack O'Neill as a discoverer of the wetsuits. And after talking to you, I decided, well, maybe I ought to back off on that just a little bit, because it had already probably been invented, but he refined it and made it practical. And he still has a beautiful line of wetsuits.
So coming closer to home, I mean, one of the things is the book only covers ocean-bound piers. It doesn't cover any inland waterways or things of that nature. Were there any piers that you left out that you felt, you know, could have deserved some of that coverage?
I get approached from time to time about the pier at Avalon.
Ah, okay.
And people would like to see that in the book. I'm still undecided about that.
Yeah.
My criteria for the piers was it had to be publicly accessible, and I wanted it to be on the California coast, and I wanted it to be part of the community there.
And a little bit closer to home, we have the Pacifica Pier, which has an interesting history. One of the strange features of a lot of piers up and down the coast is they were sort of disguising sewage outflow, which coincidentally becoming fishing piers is kind of an odd juxtaposition there of having fishing and sewage. But of course, most people figured out that was probably not a good thing. And in fact, the Pacifica Pier became one of the foremost fishing piers, cement pier. Can you tell us anything about that pier and perhaps the author that wrote that section?
Frank Cuarte wrote the chapter on Pacifica Pier, and he's another prime example of the extraordinary people that contributed to the book. He was featured in a San Francisco Chronicle news article recently, and he makes the rescues at Mavericks when the waves are 30, 40, 50 feet high. He has probably saved more lives in adverse conditions than anybody I've ever heard of. At any rate, he's grown up in Pacifica, and Pacifica has been very, very proud of the fact, as you mentioned, they're the primary fishing pier in California, and I haven't heard anybody refute that.
Well, it seems like a lot of the piers have that as a highlight, with some of the best fishing around, but I think maybe
they liked
Pacific
it.
can actually
Yeah.
justify it. I think in your book they said that there were about 1,000 salmon
Yeah.
pulled out in
Yeah.
one sitting, which
Yeah.
of course drew the interest of the local fish and game.
Yeah.
But once they sorted that all out. So is there anything in the San Francisco area as opposed to, say, Pacifica, Santa Cruz, and further south that comes to mind? Or is there kind of a big gap when we get back up to Northern California?
Yeah. It took 2.5 years to get a window for taking photographs of the piers in Northern California. Through that time, there was rain, overcast, and fog. And I needed a 3-day window.
So we need that now, but you got it when you were doing the pier book. Okay.
Yeah. Now we have it more than we'd like to have. So that was a big challenge, and they were the last piers I was able to photograph.
So you did actually work your way north.
I waited.
It got more and more difficult to get the project done as the weather set in. So yeah, I think we've covered the bulk of your book. Are there any other peers that you'd like to point out, or any people involved that? Is there a place that you could purchase this book, perchance?
Oh, thank you very much for mentioning that. The book is available at Barnes & Noble. It's available at Amazon. We have the book available maybe at 40 independent bookshops up and down the coast of California.
So people can find them by piers and wharfs and...
Yeah. It's available at Santa Cruz Wharf, a place right at the end of the pier called Made in Santa Cruz.
And how about any local bookstores that have been supporting the book?
Barnes & Noble and Maverick Surf Shop.
Oh, excellent.
And also Sam's.
Well, Ed, I just want to thank you for taking this time this evening to introduce your book to the public. And that was a fun episode working with you, Footprints of Pacifica. And it was super fun working with you on the book, even though I'm sure it was like pulling teeth at some point for you. But you got it done, and you were the driving force. So thanks again, and everybody have a good evening.